I got a job with Jack Webb. You remember, who did Dragnet, and very skilled actor, director. And he gave me my first directing opportunity when I was 25 to direct a television pilot. And that led to me directing Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Peter Gunn and series like that. Though I was not doing that full time, I ended up going to work. My father asked me to come to work with him on The Diary of Anne Frank. And I was his associate producer. Albert and Florence Hackett, a writing couple who wrote the play, worked with us on the screenplay. We're the screenplay writers. And they always talk when you have a play, well, let's take it outside. Let's, break it. And my father felt he wanted to confine it to the attic with just some scenes around it. And that was an important decision. And he wanted to make it in black and white. He didn't want, oh, what a beautiful morning Technicolor. And had his wonderful, wonderful colleague from the war, William Meller, as the cameraman, who had been a war cameraman with my father at D-Day and all through the war in Europe. But before we started filming, we went to Europe. Actually, my father had to be at the Cannes Film Festival. He was on the jury, and I went with him for the first time to the Cannes Film Festival. And among the films that year were Bergman's, I'm forgetting the title, with Max von Sydow, wonderful historic Bergman film, and Truffaut and Francois Truffaut's first film was shown. So it was my introduction to kind of European cinema. Then we went to Normandy in France, and my father and I walked Juno Beach, where he landed actually 79 years ago today. Today is D-Day, when you and I are speaking in real time. And we went all around Normandy and talked about the war and saw the war. And then we went to Amsterdam and checked into a hotel, then went downtown to a little office building in the city, and knocked on a door. And this tall man with balding, with white hair, very straight posture, Otto Frank, opened the door, the father of Anne Frank. And he invited us in, and we went into a little room that he had, and his wife was there. He had lost his wife, his two daughters in Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp, but he met his next wife at Auschwitz, where he was, and survived. And she was a lovely woman. And we sat, and he served us coffee, and we talked, and he was looking at the man who was going to put his daughter's experience on the screen. And, obviously wanted to understand him and see what he was made of. But after a little while, he went to a filing cabinet, opened it, pulled out something wrapped in cloth, and put it on the table in front of my father and me, and unfurled the cloth. And there was Anna Frank's diary, with her pictures pasted in, and all of her little, this red plaid cover, just these pages. And, it was so moving to actually see that, and it was, it would 80 million people, I believe, have bought that book. And we left the little office building and got on a boat, a little, that go around Amsterdam, but little barge-like boat, and went to the Prinsengracht, a street. And that was where the spice factory that he had operated, which it's a 5-story building. And on the top floor, they had put this false bookcase, and behind it was a kind of an apartment where they hid. And my father and I and Otto Frank walked up the stairs. I took a picture. In my book, My Place in the Sun, Life in the Golden Age of Hollywood and Washington, I have a picture both of me holding Anne's diary and of my father and Otto Frank by a window climbing the stairs to this place. And in that place, my father was sensitive, a sensitive man, careful, but he felt he had to ask Otto about the last day when the Green Police and the German, when they came for him. And he told us about how the Germans came in and rousted them all around and found his briefcase where he kept ration coupons, what the money, jewelry, valuables, passports for what they were worth. They just took it and they shook it out all on the floor with a bunch of other papers. And then they gathered up the jewelry and the money and then organized everybody and took them down the stairs. But they left the papers on the floor. And the papers were Anne's diary. And Miep Geese, the woman who worked at the factory and helped them and protected them, she found them and she gathered them up and put them away. And the Germans had really left the evidence behind, this testimony to the terror that they were invoking. And then we went to work and made the film, which was a great experience in itself. We had this big soundstage. There's also a picture in the book, the 3-story soundstage we built that had the factory, it's vertical, and on the ground floor was the factory, and the second floor, equipment and stuff, and then third floor offices, and then up above was the hiding place. And we reproduced the hiding place on the ground, so we could make a shot going up, so you could see people going up all the way and have the sense of place. My father had been a cameraman and of course had an eye for that sort of thing. And then we built the hiding place on the ground, another part of the stage, built it on springs. So when bombs hit, the whole, instead of shaking the camera, you shook the set with the people in it. It was very imaginative because it required great cinematic skill to keep a story alive in that confined space. The confinement was part of the drama, but it limited, you had to, the framing of the scenes is quite extraordinary. And so that was just day by day. We would go there and shoot with the same actors. And then when he got behind, as he often did on schedule, he asked me to go to Amsterdam and direct all the location filming, which he very rarely passed on that kind of responsibility for his films. But that was an extraordinary experience. And then we spent, like as my father was wont to, nearly a year editing the film. Some said that was the place where he really made his films. It's a succession. All these shots that you make, they mean nothing until you join one piece of film to another piece of film, and then to another piece of film, and then to another and another and another. And it is the intersection of those films, those shots, one to another, that tell the story. So it is the most creative part of movie making. And I learned 2 lessons from my father during that. The first is respect for the audience. At the time, movie studios, they used to say, well, the audience has the mentality of 14-year-olds. And there was this tendency to talk down. My father really believed, he said about Shane, I remember him saying, I think I made this for the truck driver in Kansas. He said he's alone all day. He's alone with his thoughts, and he has ideas and imagination, but not the tools to articulate. so that was his idea, to trust the audience. And as we were late into the film, and I was in my 25, I guess, or 6 by then, and these long summer days, and Dad would just start at the beginning, go through the film, and just kept getting better and better. And finally, at one point, we'd had a couple of previews, and I said, Dad, this film is awfully good. Don't you think we should just lock it up and put it out there for the public? And he said, I think about how many man hours, today he would have said man and woman hours, will be spent watching this film here and abroad and around the world. And when I think of that, I ask, don't you think it's better we spend a little more of our time making it as good as it can be for those who are going to spend all those hours watching it? And I took those ideas with me and attempted to apply that respect for the audience and for their time to my work. But maybe the genesis is my father and mother both kept things. My mother kept all of these letters and papers about his family, the grandparents, and her own mother, who was an actress. And my father kept this place up called on Beacon Storage in North Hollywood, California, where he kept everything from the Laurel and Hardy scripts to the memorabilia from the war, movies, everything, business papers. And so I kept a lot all during my various careers. The AFI, the Kennedy Center, USIA. So I had all this stuff, and I kept notes. I didn't keep a diary, but from time to time I made notes. And then at one point, maybe 15 years ago, I kind of did a chronology, kind of thought back on what my life had been. So I think I always had kind of in mind that I might do this sometime. And then somewhere around 2015, I sat down and started typing while doing all this other stuff. And then when COVID came, I was pretty well into it. And then I have a nice house here in Georgetown, and I just really did it. I wrote it, and I did it without talking to a publisher, because I found memoirs that I've read did not make me feel altogether better about the person I was reading about. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to do something that was going to be too extravagant about myself and embarrassing. So I wrote it and then went about with the publishing.
How long did you go through multiple drafts, or did you treat it by era? Kind of.
I started at the beginning, and like a movie, and then I go back to the beginning. I keep going back to the beginning, getting it in pretty good shape, extending it, going back, extending it, get to the end, and then start going through it, and applying my father's mantra of hopefully people are going to spend a lot of man and woman hours reading this and listening to it. The audio version of My Place in the Sun has just come out. And I had some collaborators. I didn't have an editor, but I had good friends who were writers, a writer named Pat McGilligan, Paul Cronin, who would read it and give me comments. And pretty soon I got to the end. I think that, hopefully not too immodestly, that I was consistent in pursuing excellence. Whether I achieved it at all times, that was always the goal. And of course, that comes, in large part from a father who I saw do that. And I'll tell you a story about my father. In 1952, he'd been back from the war for a few years, and we went to the 1952 Academy Awards together. And my mother and grandmother, he was driving the car, as actress grandmother and my mother in the back seat. And we went to I think it was at the Grauman's Chinese. And my father and I sat together, and Joseph L. Mankiewicz, fine director, had won the Oscar the year before for All About Eve. He came out to present the award for Best Director. And he read the nominees. John Huston for The African Queen, William Wyler for Detective Story, Vincent Minnelli for An American in Paris, Elia Kazan for A Streetcar Named Desire, and George Stevens for A Place in the Sun. Well, I wouldn't be telling you this story if John Huston had won that night. But driving home, the Oscar on the seat between us, this big night, his first Oscar, I don't know why, but he looked over at me. I was, I guess, 18. And he said, you know, he said, we'll have a better idea of what kind of a film this is in about 25 years. And this was before Cinematex or DVDs or streaming. Pictures came and went. But he thought of this in terms, you know, and that film is now 70 years old. And it's as good as it was that night. And now he did not know that he was riding in the seat next to him was the founder of the American Film Institute, or the creator of the Kennedy Center Honors. But clearly he had an influence on me in that way. And so when you ask of what, you know, obviously the things in the book, the creation of the AFI, serving as a public life in the Kennedy years, in the early Johnson years, the creating the Kennedy Center Honors, and then of course all of my own work, you know, the writing, directing, producing, and you know, having the feeling that next year, 1924 will be the 40th anniversary of George Stevens' A Filmmaker's Journey, the movie I made 40 years ago about my father, which I'm, again, immodestly, many say is the best film about a filmmaker. So all those good things. It's nice to have written it down, be presented with an honorary Oscar, Academy Award by Sidney Poitier. I don't know how you make it any better. He's such a dear man, and a man who had such an influence on our society in such a modest but strong way.